Hey everyone, and welcome back. We love to tackle the topics you're curious about, and one that's been popping up a lot lately is milk. Is it a health hero, or should we be ditching it altogether? Well, get ready to dive deep because today we're going to unpack all the science and see if we can separate the facts from the fiction. We've got a really interesting video we're going to be taking excerpts from that goes into, both sides of the milk debate. So yeah, should be fun to see what we uncover. And I think there's going to be some stuff that surprises us.
I think so too.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's one of those things you think you know about. You've been drinking milk your whole life.
Yeah.
But then you start to kind of dig into the research and you realize, oh, there's this whole other layer of complexity to it.
Right. Like, are we the only species that drinks milk into adulthood? I mean, I think that's one of the things that I've always found kind of weird.
Yeah. That's a great place to start, actually. It is pretty unique to humans, this whole drinking milk from another species thing. I mean, think about it from an evolutionary perspective. Milk is designed to nourish and protect newborns those first few months of life. It's packed with antibodies and essential nutrients, perfectly tailored for that stage of development.
Right. So it makes perfect sense for babies to be drinking milk. But what about adults?
Exactly. And that's where the story of milk in humans takes a really interesting turn. Rewind about 11,000 years or so. That's when our ancestors started to domesticate animals.
Hmm.
And with that came the ability to utilize a whole new food source, milk.
So basically we went from hunting and gathering to having this steady supply of, calories and nutrients, right, from these domesticated animals.
Yeah, and it was a game changer for early humans.
Mm.
Suddenly they had a way to convert resources that we can't directly digest, like grass, into a super nutritious food.
It's like turning grass into liquid gold.
Pretty much. And this shift had a profound impact on human evolution. There's this fascinating thing called lactase persistence that emerged in populations that embraced milk consumption.
Okay, wait, lactase persistence. I've heard of that. What is that exactly?
So lactase is the enzyme that allows us to break down lactose, which is the sugar found in milk. Most mammals, including humans, produce lactase as infants. But as we get older, lactase production typically declines.
Right, which is why some people become lactose intolerant.
Exactly. But in those communities that heavily relied on milk over generations, a genetic adaptation occurred. Their bodies continued to produce lactase into adulthood. And that's lactase persistence.
So it's like evolution in action, right? Our ancestors' diets literally changed our genes.
It's a really cool example of how our environment and our food choices can shape our biology. And it also explains why lactose intolerance is more common in some parts of the world than others.
Like, I know that in East Asian communities, lactose intolerance is super common, right?
Yeah. Up to 90% of people of East Asian descent are lactose intolerant. Whereas in places like Northern Europe and North America, where dairy consumption has been a long-standing tradition, those rates are much lower.
So we've got this fascinating evolutionary history with milk, but now it seems like everywhere you turn, there are articles and headlines about the potential dangers of milk. Cancer, heart disease, brittle bones, you name it. It's enough to make anyone paranoid about pouring a glass of milk.
You're right. There's been a lot of conflicting information out there, and it can be hard to know what to believe. But it's important to look at the science and not just cherry-pick individual studies that support a particular viewpoint. That's why meta-analyses are so valuable. They take data from multiple studies and look for patterns and trends, giving us a more comprehensive and reliable picture of the evidence.
Okay, so meta-analyses are like the all-star team of research, right? They give us the big picture.
Exactly. They're like the ultimate fact checkers.
So let's start with one of the biggest concerns that people have: cancer. Does milk actually increase the risk of cancer?
Well, when you look at the meta-analyses, they haven't found a clear link between moderate milk consumption and an increased risk of cancers like breast, colon, or prostate.
That's reassuring, especially because I know there were some older studies that suggested a potential link between milk and breast cancer.
Right. And it's important to address those concerns because those studies did get a lot of attention. But the newer meta-analyses, which take into account a much larger pool of data, haven't found that same association.
So it seems like we can breathe a sigh of relief there. What about colon cancer, though?
With colon cancer, some studies have actually pointed to a potential protective effect of calcium. And milk is obviously a good source of calcium, although it's important to remember that you can get calcium from other foods as well.
That's a good point. Calcium isn't exclusive to milk. All right, so colon cancer, we're good. What about prostate cancer? That's another one that comes up a lot in conversations about milk.
Yeah, there have been some studies that suggested a possible link between high milk consumption and an increased risk of prostate cancer. But we're talking about really high levels of consumption, like over 1.25 liters per day.
Okay, so basically way more than the average person is drinking.
Yeah. And even then, the results have been inconsistent, so
Yeah.
it's not a clear-cut case. The important thing to remember is that moderate milk consumption, which is generally considered to be around 100 to 250 milliliters per day, is unlikely to pose a significant risk when it comes to prostate cancer.
So moderation seems to be the key message here, as with so many things in life. Okay, so we can put those cancer worries to rest, at least when it comes to moderate milk consumption. But what about other health issues like heart disease or stroke? Does milk have any impact there?
Well, the good news continues on that front, too. Those large-scale meta-analyses we were talking about. They haven't found any conclusive evidence to suggest that drinking milk or consuming dairy products increases your risk of heart disease, stroke, or even overall mortality.
Oh, wow. Really? So no need to worry about milk clogging up our arteries or anything like that.
Not according to the current research. In fact, there's even some intriguing research that hints at a potential benefit. Some studies have suggested that dairy intake might actually be associated with lower blood pressure.
Lower blood pressure. That's interesting. I would have thought it would be the opposite.
Yeah, it's definitely counterintuitive.
Yeah.
But it's important to note that this is still an area that needs more research. It's not a definitive conclusion yet, but it does suggest that the relationship between milk and our health might be more complex than we initially thought.
It seems like milk is full of surprises. Okay, so we've debunked some of the major myths surrounding milk. But what about the classic claim that milk builds strong bones? I mean, that's something we've all heard growing up.
Oh yeah, that's like the milk marketing slogan that's been drilled into our heads for generations.
Exactly. So I'm curious to hear what the research actually has to say about that. Does milk really live up to its bone-building reputation?
Well, it's a bit more nuanced than that. While some studies have shown that milk consumption can have a positive effect on bone density, particularly in children and adolescents, the evidence for adults is less clear-cut. Some studies have found no significant benefits for adults when it comes to bone health.
So milk might not be the magical bone-building elixir it's often made out to be, at least not for grown-ups.
It seems that way.
Oh.
Yeah. It looks like milk's role in bone health is a bit more complicated and might vary depending on factors like age and other dietary factors.
Makes sense. Okay, so even if the health risks of milk are overblown, there are still concerns about what might be in our milk. I'm talking about things like pesticides, antibiotics, and hormones. Are those legitimate concerns?
Yeah, I understand those concerns, especially with all the talk about industrial farming practices and the potential for contaminants to end up in our food.
Exactly. Like, I know there's been a lot of focus on the use of antibiotics in livestock and how that could contribute to antibiotic resistance.
Right. And that's definitely something to be aware of. But it's important to remember that most countries have pretty strict regulations in place to ensure the safety of their milk supply. Those regulations set limits on the levels of pesticides, antibiotics, and hormones that are allowed in commercially available milk.
So basically, we can rest assured that the milk we're buying from the store is safe to drink in terms of those contaminants.
Yeah, for the most part, those levels are kept within safe limits and are not a cause for concern.
That's good to know. But what about those who experience issues like acne or digestive discomfort after consuming milk? I know those seem to be fairly common complaints.
You're absolutely right. Those are very real and often overlooked aspects of the milk conversation. There's actually been some research that's linked skimmed milk consumption to an increased risk of acne.
Oh, really? Skimmed milk? I wouldn't have expected that.
Yeah, it's counterintuitive, right? You'd think the fattier milk would be the culprit. But it seems like skimmed milk might be more problematic in that regard. And then there's the issue of milk allergies, which are more common than you might think.
I know a lot of kids have milk allergies, but I always thought they grew out of them.
Some do, but not everyone. For example, in Germany, about 1 in 18 children has a milk allergy.
Wow, that's a lot higher than I realized. So it's not just a childhood issue then?
Not necessarily.
Mm.
It can persist into adulthood for some people, but thankfully those allergies often do improve with age.
Well, it seems like there's a lot to consider when it comes to milk and how our bodies react to it. But let's not forget that milk is also a nutrient-dense beverage. It provides essential vitamins, minerals, and protein, right?
Oh, absolutely. Milk is a valuable source of nutrients, especially in regions of the world where access to a diverse and balanced diet is limited.
So it can be a really important part of ensuring adequate calorie nutrient intake, particularly for children and those struggling with malnutrition.
Exactly. But it's also important to remember that milk isn't essential for good health in developed countries where we have a wide variety of nutritious food options available.
Right, it's not like we're all going to become deficient if we don't drink milk.
Exactly. It's all about making informed choices based on your individual needs and preferences.
And like with most things in life, moderation is key. I imagine overconsumption of milk, especially the flavored and sugary varieties, could contribute to weight gain and other health problems.
Oh, definitely. It's all about balance. You don't
Yeah.
want to go overboard with any one food or beverage,
Yep.
even something as seemingly healthy as milk.
So we've covered a lot of ground here in terms of the health aspects of milk, but there's another critical aspect of the milk debate that we haven't touched on yet, and that's the environmental and ethical implications of milk production.
Yeah, that's a really important part of the conversation and one that often gets overlooked.
It's definitely the elephant in the room. We can't talk about milk without acknowledging its impact on the planet.
You're absolutely right. And when you start to look at the numbers, it's pretty eye-opening. Did you know that a staggering 33% of global cropland is dedicated to feeding livestock? And that includes dairy cows.
33%. Wow, that's a huge chunk of land.
It is. And it has significant implications for things like land use deforestation and biodiversity loss. And then there's the issue of greenhouse gas emissions. Dairy production contributes to about 3% of global greenhouse gas emissions.
3%, that's more than the entire aviation industry, right?
Yeah, it's a lot more than many people realize. And it really makes you think about the environmental cost of that daily glass of milk.
It definitely puts things into perspective. So we've got the environmental impact, and then there's the ethical dimension as well. Factory farming practices, which are prevalent in many parts of the world, raise some serious concerns about animal welfare.
Right. The conditions in those intensive farming systems often prioritize production over the well-being of the animals. And that raises some ethical questions that are difficult to ignore.
It's a tough issue to grapple with. We have to weigh the nutritional benefits of milk against its environmental and ethical costs.
It's a complex equation with no easy answers.
Mm.
So given all of these concerns, what are the alternatives to cow's milk?
Yeah, that's a good question. Plant-based milks have exploded in popularity in recent years. Are they a viable option both nutritionally and environmentally?
They certainly are. Plant-based milks, which can be made from things like soy, almonds, oats, and rice, offer a more sustainable alternative to cow's milk. They generally require significantly less land, water, and energy to produce, which translates to a smaller carbon footprint.
That's great to hear. But what about their nutritional content? Do they stack up against cow's milk?
Well, their nutritional profiles do vary depending on the source. Soy milk is probably the closest in terms of matching the protein content of cow's milk. But many of the other plant-based milks often require fortification to provide similar levels of calcium, vitamin D, and other essential nutrients.
So you might need to check the labels and make sure you're getting what you need.
Right. It's always a good idea to compare labels and see what works best for you. One area where plant-based milks often fall short is in replicating the complex protein structure of cow's milk.
Oh, I've noticed that, plant-based cheeses don't always have the same taste and texture as dairy cheese. Is that related to the protein differences?
Exactly. Cow's milk contains two key proteins, casein and whey, that give traditional cheese its unique melting properties, texture, and flavor. And replicating those characteristics with plant-based ingredients has proven to be quite challenging.
It sounds like plant-based milks are a pretty good alternative, but there's still room for improvement, especially when it comes to those dairy lovers like me who crave a good cheese. Are there any other innovations on the horizon that might bridge that gap, between sustainability and our love for dairy?
Well, there is one development that's generating a lot of buzz and has the potential to really revolutionize the dairy industry.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Lay it on me.
It's called lab-grown milk.
Lab-grown milk. That sounds like something straight out of a science fiction movie.
I know, right? It sounds super futuristic, but it's
Yeah.
actually becoming a reality.
Okay, so how does that even work? Are they like milking cells in a lab or something?
Not quite. It's a bit more complicated than that, but also kind of cool. They're using a process called precision fermentation to create milk that's basically identical to cow's milk.
Identical, you mean like in terms of taste and nutrition?
Exactly. They're using genetically engineered microorganisms like yeast or bacteria to produce the same proteins that are found in cow's milk, whey, and casein.
So they're basically hacking the system and getting these microorganisms to do the work for them.
Yeah, it's pretty ingenious.
Yeah.
These proteins are then combined with other essential nutrients like fats, sugars, and vitamins to create a product that mirrors the nutritional profile of traditional milk.
So we could potentially have our milk and drink it too without the environmental burden or the ethical concerns associated with conventional dairy farming.
That's the idea. And it's pretty exciting. It could be a total game changer.
It's amazing to see how science is finding these innovative solutions to such complex issues.
It really is. It gives me hope for the future. So as we wrap up our deep dive into the world of milk, What are some of the key takeaways you'd like listeners to walk away with?
Well, I think one of the biggest takeaways for me is that milk isn't a simple black and white issue. It has a fascinating history, going back thousands of years. It's deeply intertwined with human evolution and culture. And it's a valuable source of nutrients, but it also comes with environmental and ethical baggage. And as we've seen, there are some really exciting alternatives on the horizon that could lead to a more sustainable and compassionate future for dairy.
I completely agree. It's a multifaceted topic that requires, careful consideration and informed decision-making.
hmm
What would you say is the most important thing for listeners to keep in mind as they navigate this complex world of milk?
I think the key is to be an informed consumer. Do your research, explore the different options available, and make choices that align with your own personal values and priorities. Whether you decide to stick with traditional cow's milk, embrace the plant-based alternatives, or eagerly await the arrival of lab-grown milk. The most important thing is to be aware of the impact of those choices, the impact on your health, on the environment, on the well-being of animals.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Well, thanks for joining me on this deep dive. It's been a fascinating conversation, and I hope our listeners found it informative and thought-provoking.
It's been my pleasure.
And to everyone listening, keep those questions coming. We love hearing from you, and we'll see you next time for another deep dive.